Good morning. We're going to start our story of Aboriginal Australia in 1770 with the arrival of Captain Cook. Strange place to start, you might suggest, and in a way, you'd be right. But to quote the English singer-songwriter Passenger, you only miss the sun when it starts to snow, only knew you love her when you let her go, and only know you've been high when you're feeling low. Oftentimes, things are defined by what they're not. And we need to accept that to use a term like Aboriginal Australian. Because despite Aboriginal Australians having lived on these lands for tens of thousands of years, probably about 65,000 years, despite Aboriginal Australians representing the oldest living civilization on Earth, despite all that, Aboriginal Australians didn't exist until the Brit, Captain James Cook, landed at Botany Bay in 1770. Until that point, Aboriginal Australians were just Australians. Well, really, they were Koori or Tiwi or Palawa or any number of different tribes. And it's important to recognise that it was the arrival of outsiders in their own land that resulted in them being labelled as an other. Captain Cook was on a bit of a covert mission. The ship he was commanding, the HMS Endeavour, had a publicly declared mission of charting the waters of the Southern Hemisphere. The expedition was financed by the Royal Society of London, a society of exploration, of scientific discovery. But the British Admiralty, what would go on to become the Royal Navy, heard of this exploratory voyage, and they slipped Captain Cook a sealed letter of instruction with another mission. The letter was to be opened only by Captain Cook. There were two parts. Sail to Tahiti and observe the transit of Venus. Okay, I can't see anybody being too upset about that. But the first letter concluded as follows. When this service is performed, you are to put to sea without loss of time and carry into execution the additional instructions contained in the enclosed sealed packet. Spelling was different back then. And what were these secret instructions that only Captain Cook was to know? You were to proceed to the southward in order to make discovery of the continent above mentioned until you arrive in the latitude of 40 degrees, unless you sooner fall in with it. They were fairly convinced that there would be a great southern land, reasoned by the fact that the world would be top-heavy if all the land were in the northern hemisphere. And Britain wanted to colonise this great southern land. But here's something interesting about that letter. Cook is not instructed to conquer the land of Australia. He's not told to take it by force. His explicit written instructions handed to him in a top-secret sealed envelope stated, with the consent of the natives, take possession of convenient situations in the country in the name of the King of Great Britain. With the consent of the natives. An interesting inclusion. Now, we're not going to discuss whether or not Captain Cook successfully followed his instructions, but the reference to natives is hugely important and had very real legal consequences 222 years later in the famous Mabo versus Queensland case, all about the ownership of land over which native title exists. What that letter proves is that the British, setting out to colonise Australia, were aware that they weren't the first ones there. In fact, from half a world away, the president of the Royal Society, James Douglas, the 14th Earl of Moreton, gave Captain Cook some advice. Endeavour by every fair means to cultivate a friendship with the natives and to treat them with all imaginable humanity. Very much warning Cook against the use of violence, the Earl of Moreton gave Cook the following thoughts, which in many ways seem centuries ahead of their time. Check the petulance of the sailors and restrain the wanton use of firearms. have it still in view that shedding the blood of those people is a crime of the highest nature. They are human creatures, the work of the same omnipotent author, equally under his care with the most polished European, perhaps being less offensive, more entitled to his favour. Morton's advice continued, and this is unambiguous in its guidance. They are the natural and, in the strictest sense of the word, the legal possessors of the several regions they inhabit. No European nation has a right to occupy any part of their country or settle among them without their voluntary consent. Conquest over such people can give no such title, because they could never be the aggressors. It seems baffling from the perspective of today, knowing all the egregious wrongs that Aboriginal Australians would suffer over the subsequent centuries of colonisation, that the British, on paper, were so morally righteous in their approach. But here's the thing with empires and any ideology. They are usually engaged in the pursuit of good. The issue is, we don't all agree on what good is. 18th century British colonialists thought they were bettering the world at the same time as bringing benefit to the British Crown. But having some respect for the native inhabitants of the land they colonised didn't equate to seeing them as equals. Perhaps this is best reflected in Cook's own diary. He wrote, "They may appear to some to be the most wretched people upon earth, but in reality, they are far more happier than we Europeans, being wholly unacquainted not only with the superfluous, but the necessary conveniences so much sought after in Europe. They are happy in not knowing the use of them. They live in a tranquility which is not disturbed by the inequality of condition." While some saw the natives as wretched, Cook observed that they were, in fact, much happier than many of the Europeans looking down on them. And actually, by and large, Captain Cook had a pretty harmonious experience with the native inhabitants of the newly christened British colony of New South Wales. But over the subsequent generations, divides and rifts emerged between Aboriginal Australians and European settlers. There's a hugely turbulent history here, and it's way more complex than could be done justice in the time we have available. So today, I'd like to celebrate Aboriginal Australian culture and communities by focusing on three icons through which we can discover more about the world's oldest civilization. And for a brief period of time, I don't want to identify the native inhabitants of these lands by those who settled after them. There are 812,700 Aboriginal Australians and Torres Strait Islanders currently living in Australia. That's 3.2% of Australia's general population. By straight numbers, most live in New South Wales and Queensland. But by proportion of society, 30% of the inhabitants of the Northern Territory, the location of Uluru and other sacred Aboriginal sites are Indigenous Australians. But Native, Indigenous, Aboriginal, First Nations, the label isn't what's important. Let's find out about the culture and what these communities stand for. We're going to talk about the didgeridoo, representing the music and art of Australia. We'll talk about the boomerang, giving us a glimpse into traditional hunting and agriculture here. But first, perhaps most important and iconic of all, let's talk about the land itself. Let's talk about country. Country is a big word in Australia. Country is the land we walk on, but more than that, much more. It's the spirit that flows within us and everything that lives. The spirits of the trees, the animals, the people, their ancestors. Here's Maruchi Baramba, an elder of the Turrbal tribe. Just listen to the number of references that she makes to the geography of the land as she introduces herself.
My name is Maruchi Baramba, which means the black swan from those people who sing up the wind. I'm here in my capacity as a member of the Turrbal tribe. We are the original people of Brisbane. There's a river a little bit south of the Brisbane River called the Logan River, and an area north of Brisbane, there's a little creek called Elimba Creek, and it's all east of the main highway that goes up to the north coast, but not as far as the Glasshouse Mountains. That's the Gubbi Gubbi tribe.
You might recognise Maroochy from our Welcome to Country event in Brisbane. There's the Logan River, the Brisbane River, Elimba Creek, the mountains. It's the same for Billy Cummins.
My name is Billy Cummins. On my father's side, I'm Yalanji, Juromata Wada, Cape York. And on my mother's side, Kanami Island, which is Wapabara. You used to know it as Keppel Island. And Butchulla, Magari, which is known as Fraser Island. I spent a bit of time around Brisbane, but I still always manage to get back up to my traditional countries and learn my language and my dances, traditional dances, and play yiggy yiggy. There.
We'll get back to the yiggy yiggy shortly. But again, how many references to place were in that introduction? All I asked was, can you introduce yourself? If someone asked me that question, yes, maybe I might mention I'm from London. But I don't think I've ever introduced myself as Daniel from north of the Pin River, east of the Chiltern Hills and south of the Fens. I focus on the Daniel part. But that's not what's important here.
We don't really get into I am whatever in a big way. We believe that the spirituality of the land speaks to you. We believe in the spirituality of the land and it's speaking through us. We believe everything has a song, like the rivers, the trees, everything, and they sing their own songs, and generally we associate with them by doing performances. So letting them know that we acknowledge that they've given us these songs.
The spirits of the land are a key component of Aboriginal culture here. And a large part of Dreamtime storytelling connects people back to the lands they're from. In fact, a large amount of the oral literature of what's referred to as the dreaming is almost deified. The mythical people and spirits that possess these lands are sacred, and as such, the land itself is considered holy and something to be revered and respected. When you hear someone talking about Dreamtime or the dreaming, they're referring to the Aboriginal mythology and the creation of the earth by way of the spirits. Spirits that dreamed the world into existence. And there's something that you'll find in every single Dreamtime story. And that's a reference to the land. These stories are all fundamentally anchored to the land that they are from. And this connection to country isn't implied, it's explicit. Just listen to the start of a few myths, you're going to get the picture. This is the Great Fire on Gumul. A Yarriwarrag man and his son, Yarrag Nagurg, lived in Wangaran on Malay Bay. They had originally come from Warulja, Grant Island near Croker Island, which belonged to the Gari and Mulgu people. The son was a good singing man, so his father sent him to learn songs from the songmen living at Malgunga and Bangbalenya. This Dreamtime story is actually about the consequences of doing a bad deed. In this particular case, the boy hits a turtle and then lies about it, causing the whole area to erupt into a giant fireball. But all that preamble is about the land and his connection to where he came from. Some Dreamtime stories relate directly to the creation of the land, as in the story of the widening of Lake Gregory. 2 Jambidgin dreaming dogs chased 2 emus who were Jurungare. They chased them down from Sturt Creek through from Burrawi near to Sturt Creek Station to Lubu Billabong. They were coming from the east, following them to Wide Leg, a large billabong, to Wobalan, to Digil, to Ngama Dgama, to Walla Walla, to Yana, to Meira, to Lingi Lingi, to Labola Biraru, and to One Mandara, billabongs, and then on to Wongu and Old Billaluna Station. That's a long list. But to understand how the waters widened, it was important that the oral storytellers acknowledged the path that these dogs took via various billabongs for water. By the end of their journey, once they'd finally caught the emus, they'd eaten and feasted on them. They were so full that they breathed this monumental sigh of satisfaction, and it was so huge that it blew the banks of Lake Gregory away from each other, widening the lake. The dogs aren't the main character in the story. The land is. And actually, even as we talk about our next two icons, the didgeridoo and the boomerang, you'll see that we keep returning almost unavoidably to the land itself. But for now, we're going to shift our attention to our next icon of Aboriginal Australia, and we'll talk about the didgeridoo, or the yiggy yiggy, as we heard from Billy earlier.
The word didgeridoo is a slang word for the sound that comes out of it. That is describing the sound, not the instrument. And on Gulf of Carpentaria, Mornington Island, they have the same instrument, looks and sounds the same, but they call their instrument laba. And the top half of Northern Territory and the islands of Northern Territory, they have the same instrument, looks and sounds the same, but they call theirs Yaraki. East and Western Australia, with the border of Western Australia and Northern Territory, they also play this instrument too, and they call it Yiriki.
The didgeridoo is played by Aboriginal Australians all over the country. There are at least 45 different words used to describe this instrument that is synonymous with Australia. Thought to have originally been made out of bamboo, traditional didgeridoos are also often made from various eucalyptus species that are endemic to northern and central Australia. And it's crafted not just from nature, but with nature. Traditional didgeridoo makers look for hollow live trees in areas where there's been some obvious termite activity. The termites attack living eucalyptus trees, but only eat out the dead inner heartwood, because the living outer sapwood has a chemical that the termites really don't like. So by the force of nature and indigenous knowledge of the landscape, termite-hollowed tree trunks are selected. The traditional craftsman checks that the tree is suitably hollow with a bit of a tap check, something of a knock on wood, and then they'll cut down the tree, strip back the bark, trim down the ends, and shape the exterior to their preferred design. And bam, an age-old creative partnership with nature. The longer the pipe, the lower the pitch. And generally speaking, didgeridoos vary in length from around 1 metre or 3 feet for a smaller one, to 3 metres, 10 feet for the longest examples. A didgeridoo player will often accompany tribal dancers as they perform Dreamtime stories as part of traditional ceremonies. But modern medical research suggests that there's even more reason to play the didgeridoo. And actually, some of you might want to listen up here. In 2006, a study in the British Medical Journal reported that learning and practicing the didgeridoo helped reduce snoring by strengthening the muscles in the upper airway. Now, obviously, no one in this room snores, but who'd like their partner to maybe take a few didgeridoo lessons? Okay, how do you play the didgeridoo?
The way I was taught is just get that basic droning sound, right? You don't squeeze your lips tight together, you just let them touch. Yeah, if you squeeze your lips tight together, you'll end up with like that. You get that basic droning sound. And you're doing several different sounds all at once. That noise is coming from the back of like you're clearing your throat or something like that. or your tongue, like a lot of our dances are about animals, because the animals taught us a lot, and we showed them respect by paying homage to them in a lot of our dances. Like, by watching them, we knew how to, our old people got hunting skills from them animals. Eagles, dingoes, emus, you know. So the best, and we try and imitate their sounds. Of course, an animal makes not just one certain sound, it'll make several sounds. One when it's happy and drinking water at the river or creek. It'll make a different sound again when it's fighting, and it'll make another sound again when it's mating.
Tribal Australians were and are so in tune with the animal world around them. They mimic the sounds of the animals in their music, and they share the story of animals in their art. For pleasure, perhaps, but more so for information. Art, and by that I mean dance, music, painted art, communicates a message. And in a culture that's predominantly not written down, these other forms of sharing information were critical for the safety and success of the tribe. In Cairns, I met up with a local artist, Samuel Moffat, at the Australia Gallery, and he talked me through a couple of pieces by Charlie Chambers, which both feature animals as the central motif. Charlie's tribal heritage is Koa and Jarawar, and his style combines the typical dot style, which he inherited from his mother's line in Western Queensland, and crosshatch, which is the predominant style of his father's people from Northern Queensland.
Charlie's very serious about the old school approach to his art. So this is a metaphor about responsibility. So when the hatchlings arrive, the father takes over the whole affair. In part of the painting, which is unfortunately a little bit covered, there are other human hunters. And so basically, and then when you see the footprints in the sky, that's the energy of the male or the male emu looking down upon the children, basically. He actually goes into hospitals, he goes into prisons. He tries to help Aboriginal people in society who have addictions, whether it's alcohol or other issues. So he actually says, look, although your situation is bad, we as men have a responsibility to look after our children, basically. And he tells everybody that, and he takes it very, very seriously.
Here's another painting by Charlie Chambers, where he uses a typical Australian animal to convey a life lesson to the viewer.
The meaning is that the kookaburra was cursed by the gods to stay in the tree and reflect about the accidents he was causing. So these are all people who've fallen over, who've broken limbs. And so the kookaburra, do you think he learned his lesson? No, he absolutely did not. So he remains to this day sitting in the tree laughing, people keep on falling over and breaking limbs. But you also see, back to his old school style, he has a spleen going through here, which is reminiscent of how Aboriginal artists truly painted. So back in the day, it was more caveman-like. It was depicting the animals and how they lived their life through hunting and ritual and ceremony.
So art, through the didgeridoo or in paint, connects Aboriginal Australians to the animal world and, of course, back to the land itself. But Samuel mentioned hunting just then, so let's introduce our third icon of Aboriginal Australia for the final part of this talk, the boomerang. Though, again, that's not what the natives call it.
We call it barang, used for hunting birds, smaller. There's different types of, this is a returning one, so if you miss your target, it'll come back near you, so you don't have to chase after it too far. But one man would not go out by himself with one barang. There'd be several men with about 10 or more of these each. And on the waterways, with back then, thousands of birds on a lake or creek or that back then. And they positioned themselves. Because they know those, when they take off, they're going to go in a circular motion. They're going to go in a circular motion off the water, and there's 10 or more men with 10 of these each. As that duck is flying off the water and coming around to gain height, and they'll get up 10 men, there's 10 and a couple of seconds later, there's 20, 30, 40, 50 of these going for that big flock of birds. Bound to go in with the feed. Yeah.
Boomerangs are another object that is totally inseparable from the image that people hold of Australia from around the world. But it's not actually unique to this country. Ancient boomerangs have been found in Africa, the Americas, Eurasia. 4 boomerangs were found buried in the tomb of the famous Egyptian boy king, Pharaoh Tutankhamun. But for whatever reason, perhaps the monumental endurance of Aboriginal culture, where other native cultures have assimilated or died out, the boomerang has become an Australian thing. As Billy mentioned, there's more than one type of boomerang. Most of us know the returning type, not that many of us have actually successfully had one ever return to us, but the non-returning boomerangs are more common in the very northern lands of Australia, because you're never getting a boomerang to return to you in the middle of a rainforest. So you might as well just perfect one for a perfect swipe. Anyway, boomerangs have been used by Aboriginal Australians to hunt animals like kangaroo for tens of thousands of years. Indigenous rock art in the Kimberley region depicts hunters throwing boomerangs at kangaroos, and these are considered to be some of the oldest existing examples of art in the world. If you throw a boomerang right, it will travel out parallel to the ground. Maybe it raises up a little bit within the flight, and then it will gently curve back and create a sort of a circular or teardrop arc, almost hovering at the point of return for a practice thrower to just reach out mid-flight and catch it. If you'd like, I'll demonstrate. Yeah, I thought not. Anyway, organised hunting with boomerangs is just one form of ancient Aboriginal food provisioning. Aboriginal Australians were way ahead of their time when it came to agriculture and farming too. For fish, tribespeople built rock or weave-walled cages with small entrances. They baked the cage with tasty krill, and small fish would then swim in to eat. Well, those small fish soon started to grow, and soon enough they were too big to squeeze out the small entrance that they came in through. Once they were big enough for dinner, all that was required is you reach in, pick out a fish, and tuck in. Now, throwing a boomerang like a spear to hunt animals makes sense. Creating cages for fish makes sense. But what about setting fire to the bush? Well, believe me, it made excellent sense. And if it were still practiced widely today, experts think it would dramatically reduce out-of-control forest fires. Aboriginal tribes learned how to tame fire, how to use it as their tool for hunting tasty monitor lizards, and it's called fire stick hunting. And it was typically done by women. Women would start a fire which would spread along a line of dried grasses in the outback. Monitor lizards would rush to take cover in their underground dens, and the women would take cover behind their line of fire and follow the lizards back to the dens. Smash open the den with a long stick and pull out a lovely lizardy supper. But this wasn't just good for a night of singing songs around the barbecue. It actually contributed to a healthy and safe desert landscape. You see, uncontrolled grass growth in the outback of Western Australian desert can lead to nasty wildfires. And with so much paper-dry kindling to get the fire started, they really can spread like wildfire. But controlled fire hunting broke up the vast swathes of dry bush and helped prevent fires from whipping up and getting out of hand. And there's something else they did too. By burning up all that grass cover, loads of nitrogen-rich ash fed the soil. And because it had been cleared of thick grass, seeds of other species of plant and trees could find their way through to grow. With a bit of rain and well-managed natural resources, tribes that practiced fire hunting were rewarded with a greater diversity of plant life to sustain their community. And there are still tribes here in Australia keeping this way of living alive today. So there are 3 icons of Aboriginal Australia. All natural, all intertwined, all deeply connected. And all that give us an insight into the oldest civilization on Earth. A culture that is intrinsically connected to the land, that celebrates that connection and educates itself via music and art, and that uses that generational knowledge to hunt, farm, and conserve nature in a way that so many of us in the Western world forgot centuries ago. Thank you for coming, and to play us out today, here's Billy Cummings playing the Yiggy Yiggy. Have a good day.